The mansion on the Upper East Side was a monument to wealth and hollowness, especially on Christmas Eve. Garlands of silver and gold were draped over marble fireplaces, and a towering fir tree glittered with lights that seemed to mock the forced smiles of the guests. The air, thick with the scent of pine and expensive perfume, carried the sharp clinking of champagne glasses and brittle laughter that never quite reached anyone's eyes. It was a perfect portrait of success, meticulously arranged and utterly devoid of warmth. Amidst the soulless celebration, a palpable tension coiled in the atmosphere, a cold undercurrent that only one person seemed to feel. For Maya, the grand rooms felt less like a home and more like an elaborate stage for a play in which she had long forgotten her lines, a gilded cage whose bars were closing in. Maya stood near the grand staircase, a vision of quiet elegance in a deep emerald gown. The dress was a designer's masterpiece, her jewelry understated but priceless, her hair styled with a precision that left no room for imperfection. Yet beneath the flawless exterior, she was a study in subtle defeat. Her shoulders were slightly slumped, a posture learned from years of trying to take up as little space as possible. A sad beauty haunted her features, and her smile, a fragile mask she wore for social survival, never managed to ignite a spark in her distant, lost eyes. She was the personification of a dream for many, but inside she was an echo of the woman she once was. An architect with a voice, a passion, and a future she had traded for a hollow promise of belonging that was never fulfilled. The party reached its crescendo of feigned merriment just as her husband Richard approached. He moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of a man who owned the world, a cynical smile playing on his lips. In front of his mother, the formidable family matriarch, and a circle of watchful guests, he stopped before Maya. He didn't offer a kind word or a festive greeting. Instead, he extended a sleek Mont Blanc pen and a sheaf of papers. "Sign it, Maya," he said, his voice low but carrying clearly in the sudden lull of conversation. "Let's get this over with before Christmas, so we can start the new year." Lighter. The divorce papers, already bearing his signature, lay on top. The humiliation was a physical blow, public and absolute, delivered with the casual cruelty of a man swatting a fly. For a heartbeat, the world dissolved into a deafening roar of laughter and clinking glass. Maya felt the floor tilt beneath her, the urge to crumble into 1,000 pieces almost overwhelming. But as she swayed, her hand instinctively flew to her chest, her fingers closing around the cool, familiar shape of the old silver locket hidden beneath her gown. The touch of the worn metal was an anchor in the storm, a jolt that pulled her back from the abyss. It wasn't a memory of him that steadied her, but a memory of herself. It is in these moments of unbearable cruelty that the true strength of a person is forged. If you feel that stories of quiet courage need a voice, subscribing helps us share more accounts just like this one, reminding us that even in the darkest of times, dignity can be reclaimed. That locket was more than just jewelry. It was a time capsule. Inside, nestled against the faded velvet, was a microscopic photograph of her parents, their smiles radiant and full of a hope she had long forgotten. They were standing in front of a small, promising architectural firm, the one her father had built from the ground up with passion and integrity. Maya remembered the smell of sawdust and drafting paper that always clung to his clothes, a scent she once associated with safety and creation. He had taught her to see the world not just as it was, but as it could be, a series of problems waiting for elegant solutions. He believed in the strength of good design, in structures that served people, and in a foundation built on honesty. It was a world away from the gilded emptiness of the Blackwood mansion. Her first meeting with Richard had felt like a whirlwind of cinematic romance. He was charming, attentive, and seemingly fascinated by her career. He would visit her at the studio, listening with what she thought was genuine interest as she explained the complexities of structural engineering or the beauty of a perfectly balanced facade. He praised her ambition, calling her a force of nature, and made her believe he saw the brilliant mind behind her eyes, not just a future wife to decorate his arm. He painted a future where their worlds would merge, where her creativity and his business acumen would build an empire together. She fell for the dream he sold, a beautiful blueprint for a life that, she would later learn, was designed with a foundation of lies. The transition from a respected architect to a silent ornament was gradual, a slow erosion of self. It began with subtle suggestions. He'd say her projects were too demanding, that she deserved a break after working so hard. He'd surprise her with lavish trips that conveniently conflicted with important client meetings. His mother, Eleanor Blackwood, played her part with masterful precision, her compliments always laced with a delicate poison. She would remark on how wonderful it was that Maya had a little hobby to keep her busy, her tone making it clear that a real career was unbefitting a Blackwood wife. Slowly, Maya's professional world shrank, her drafting table gathering dust in a forgotten room of the mansion as her days filled with charity luncheons and fittings for gowns she didn't want to wear. She had fought back at first, clinging to the remnants of her identity. She remembered one dinner party vividly. A guest, a prominent real estate developer, was discussing a new skyscraper project, and Maya, seeing a flaw in the proposed public space design, offered a thoughtful, well-reasoned critique. The table fell silent. Richard had laughed, a short, dismissive sound, and patted her hand. "Darling, let's leave the big buildings to the men," he'd said, winking at the developer. The casual condescension was a public execution of her expertise. The other guests chuckled politely, and the conversation moved on, leaving Maya feeling invisible, her voice silenced, her passion relegated to the status of an amusing parlor trick. That night, she stopped trying. The secret she carried was a constant cold weight against her chest. Years into her marriage, while sorting through a box of her late father's effects she'd kept in storage, she found it. Tucked inside an old ledger was a set of documents, correspondence, and transfer receipts that laid out in excruciating detail the story of his ruin. It was a hostile, fraudulent takeover, orchestrated with surgical cruelty by a then-rising competitor, Richard's father, Jonathan Blackwood. Her own father, a man of honor who believed in handshakes and good faith, had been systematically dismantled, bankrupted, and stripped of his life's work. The official cause of his death a few months later was a heart attack, but Maya now knew it was a broken heart, a spirit crushed by a betrayal he never saw coming. Realization had crashed down on her with the force of a physical blow. Her marriage wasn't a coincidence. It was a strategy. By marrying the only heir of the man they had destroyed, the Blackwoods had absorbed the last remaining threat to their legacy. They had brought the ghost of their greatest sin into their own home, keeping her close, placated with wealth and luxury, ensuring the truth would remain buried forever. She was not a wife, she was an insurance policy. The locket, once a symbol of her loving past, transformed into a reliquary of this devastating truth. It became her silent witness, a promise to her father that she would never forget, even as she was forced to live a lie every single day. Walking away from the party was like stepping off a cliff in slow motion. The cold night air hit her face, a shocking contrast to the suffocating warmth of the mansion. She hailed a cab, her movements mechanical, her mind a maelstrom of shock and adrenaline. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, she looked back at the brightly lit windows, a perfect picture of a life that was no longer hers. For the first time in a decade, she was utterly alone, with no money, no plan, and no one to call. The full weight of her decision began to settle in her stomach, a terrifying, leaden knot of fear. She had defied the most powerful family she knew, and the consequences would be swift and brutal. Her hand, still trembling, went to the locket. She clutched it tightly, the cool metal a single point of certainty in a world that had just shattered. The fear was real, a primal instinct screaming at her to go back, to apologize, to sign the papers, and accept whatever crumbs they offered. But beneath the fear, a different feeling was stirring, something she hadn't felt in years, a spark of defiance. It was the architect in her, the problem solver, the woman who knew that even the most daunting structure begins with a single, solid point of foundation. Her truth, the one hidden in the locket, was that foundation. She had been a prisoner for so long, and now, even in this terrifying uncertainty, she was finally, breathtakingly free. She checked into a small, anonymous hotel far from the glittering prison of the Upper East Side. The room was simple, almost stark, with a single window overlooking a quiet, rain-slicked street. There was no marble, no silver, no suffocating scent of pine and perfume. It smelled of clean linens and disinfectant, the most beautiful scent in the world. She stood in front of the cheap, full-length mirror on the back of the door and truly looked at herself. The emerald gown was a costume, the perfect hair a wig, the sad beauty a mask. She saw the fear in her own eyes. But for the first time, she also saw a glimmer of the woman she used to be. The woman who built things. It's in these quiet, terrifying moments after the storm, when you are left with nothing but the truth of who you are, that the real rebuilding begins. To find the courage to lay a new foundation for your life is a story that deserves to be told. If you believe in the power of these quiet victories, subscribing helps us continue to share them, ensuring that every voice fighting to be heard finds an audience that understands. With deliberate, steady hands, Maya unclasped the locket. She sat on the edge of the bed, the worn silver feeling warm in her palm. She opened it, gazing at the faded image of her parents. They looked so young, so full of dreams. She carefully unfolded the tiny, brittle piece of paper tucked behind the photo. It was a copy of the final fraudulent transfer document, with Jonathan Blackwood's signature clearly visible. For years, this object had been a source of silent pain and shame. It was the reason for her captivity, but now, under the dim light of the hotel lamp, it looked different. It was no longer a burden. It was a key. Her fear did not vanish, but it shifted. It was no longer the paralyzing terror of a caged animal. It was the sharp, focused anxiety of a strategist before a decisive battle. The Blackwoods had underestimated her. They saw a docile, broken woman they had successfully molded into a beautiful, empty shell. They had forgotten who she was before they found her. They had forgotten she was the daughter of a builder, a woman who understood structure, leverage, and the critical importance of a fatal flaw in an otherwise imposing facade. And she had just found theirs. Her dignity was not something they could grant or take away in a settlement. It was something she was about to take back on her own terms. The Blackwood corporate office in Midtown was a fortress of glass and steel, designed to intimidate. The boardroom on the 50th floor felt like the heart of the empire, a sterile, silent space with a panoramic view of a city that felt 1,000,000 miles away. Richard was there, alongside his mother, Eleanor, their faces carved from the same cold marble. A team of 3 lawyers sat opposite Maya, their expensive suits like armor. They slid a thick folder across the vast mahogany table. It was the settlement offer, a sum designed to sound generous but feel like an insult, a final payment for a decade of her life. They expected gratitude, perhaps a few tears, and a quick signature. They saw the woman in the simple grey dress, not the architect who understood that every fortress has a weak point. Maya didn't look at the numbers. She let the folder sit there, an unopened insult between them. Her silence filled the room, a calm, steady presence that began to unnerve them. One of the lawyers cleared his throat, launching into a rehearsed speech about her future security and the importance of discretion. He spoke of the non-disclosure agreement as a mutual protection, a way to close this chapter with dignity. But Maya heard the words for what they were, the terms of her erasure. She thought of the woman who had stood trembling on the grand staircase just days before, and she felt a quiet, profound sense of distance from her. That woman was gone. In her place was someone who had finally remembered how to read a blueprint, especially one built on a faulty foundation. With a slow, deliberate motion that commanded the attention of everyone in the room, she reached up and unclasped the silver locket from around her neck. She held it in the palm of her hand for a moment, its familiar weight a final, silent reassurance. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face at this sentimental display. "Maya, this isn't the time for theatrics," he warned, his voice tight. But she ignored him, her focus entirely on the small, worn object. She wasn't performing for them. She was performing for herself, a final act of reclaiming the narrative they had stolen from her. She gently pried open the delicate clasp, the soft click echoing in the cavernous silence of the boardroom. She didn't show them the faded photograph of her parents. That was for her alone. Instead, her fingers, surprisingly steady, worked at the tiny, folded piece of paper tucked behind it. She carefully unfolded the brittle document and placed it on the polished table, directly on top of their settlement offer. It was a copy of a transfer deed, its old ink a stark contrast to the crisp, modern legal papers beneath it. "You might recognize the signature," she said, her voice even and clear. "Jonathan Blackwood. This document finalized the hostile takeover of my father's firm. It was dated 6 weeks before he died." The air in the room grew thin, the weight of her words pressing down on them, the truth landing with the force of a physical blow. "You didn't just take my career and my voice," she continued, her gaze locking with Richard's, then moving to Eleanor's horrified expression. "You built this empire on the ashes of my family. My marriage wasn't a romance. It was the final clause in your acquisition, a way to silence the ghost of the man you destroyed by owning his daughter." She pushed the settlement folder back across the table. "I don't want your dirty money. I want my dignity back. And now I'm going to take it." She stood up, her posture straight and unbroken. For the first time, the powerful Blackwoods were speechless, their fortress of lies crumbling around them, brought down not by an army, but by one quiet, undeniable truth. She left the boardroom without a backward glance, the silence she left behind more damning than any shouted accusation. Maya didn't leak the story to the press or pursue a public destructive revenge. That was their way of fighting, not hers. The proof she held was not a weapon for war, but a key to her own liberation. Faced with the undeniable evidence and the threat of complete social and financial implosion, the Blackwoods capitulated. It wasn't a settlement they signed, but a quiet annulment of history. They agreed to dissolve the marriage and, more importantly, to return the full, inflation-adjusted value of her father's company. It was not a payment for her silence. It was the restoration of a stolen legacy. She walked away from that world not with their money, but with her own, reclaiming the foundation upon which she would build her new life. 2 years later, the scent of fresh paint and cut lumber filled the air, a fragrance she hadn't realized she'd missed so desperately. She stood on the sunlit porch of a beautifully designed building, a place of clean lines, warm wood, and large windows that welcomed the light. This was the first completed project of the Lockett Foundation, a non-profit she had established to design and build transitional housing for women escaping domestic abuse. She had poured everything into it: her father's legacy, her architectural genius, and the hard-won wisdom of her own experience. It was not just a shelter, it was a statement, a structure built not to impress or intimidate, but to protect and empower. Each room, each shared space, was a testament to the idea that a safe foundation was the first step to rebuilding a life. She no longer wore designer gowns or priceless jewels. Dressed in worn jeans and a simple cotton shirt, with a smudge of sawdust on her cheek, she looked more regal than she ever had in the Blackwood mansion. Her smile was real now, reaching eyes that shone with a clear and steady purpose. As the first families began to move in, she watched a young mother gently guide her small child into their new private room. The woman turned back to Maya, her expression a mixture of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. Maya simply nodded, a shared understanding passing between them that needed no words. This was her victory, not the downfall of her enemies, but the quiet, profound joy of creating a sanctuary from the ruins of her own past, turning pain into a blueprint for hope. Her greatest strength was never the secret she kept, but the builder she had always been. She had learned that a life, like any structure, could be torn down to its studs, but a solid foundation of truth and self-worth could never be truly destroyed. The silver locket still hung around her neck, but its meaning had transformed. It was no longer a reliquary of pain, but a medal of honor, a reminder that the most powerful empires can be brought down by the quietest truths. Her story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a quiet blueprint for starting over. Sharing these accounts of courage is vital, and by subscribing, you help us give a voice to those who turn their deepest wounds into foundations for a better world.